I'd been hiking Raven's Peak for years, always careful, always aware of the weather and the narrow trails. The mountain wasn't like the others in the range. It had a reputation whispered in town and around campfires about hikers who wandered off and never came back. I never gave it much thought. I trusted my experience. That morning, the sky was a muted gray, clouds heavy, and the wind was just enough to make the pines groan. Jenna and I set off early, backpacks snug, cameras ready. She wanted to take some photos of the sunrise spilling across the cliffs. I remember thinking how eager she was, how different her pace felt that day, too brisk, almost impatient. We'd hiked this trail dozens of times, side by side, but something about the way she moved made me uneasy. About an hour in, we reached a bend where the trail narrowed and the cliff fell sharply away. Jenna went ahead, saying she'd wait for the perfect shot at the overlook. I called after her when I got distracted by a bird that flew too close to my face, but she didn't answer. I figured she'd hear me soon enough, so I slowed down, scanning the trail. Minutes passed, then more minutes. The quiet settled in around me, a thick, suffocating hush. I called her name again, louder this time, my voice bouncing off the rocks and vanishing into the trees. Only the wind answered, rustling the pine needles and tugging at my jacket. My stomach twisted. I started walking faster, expecting to see her somewhere ahead, maybe crouched down for a shot or looking over the edge. But the trail was empty. I followed it cautiously, each step crunching against loose stones. Then I saw her backpack lying in the dirt, as if she'd dropped it mid-step. My pulse jumped. I picked it up and checked inside. Empty. Not a camera, not a water bottle, nothing. It was just the bag, abandoned. The trail around it looked untouched. No footprints. No sign that anyone had passed. Yet my heart told me otherwise. The wind had shifted. It carried a sound that didn't belong. A faint scraping, almost like fingernails against bark. I spun around, scanning the trees, but saw nothing. Just the shadows of the branches and the gray sky above. I tried to retrace my steps, calling Jenna, shouting her name until my voice grew hoarse. The sun had started its slow descent, and the forest darkened unevenly, shadows stretching longer and darker than they should. I realized then that I didn't know which way to go. The trail seemed to twist, curving in ways that made no sense. Rocks I remembered were gone, replaced by roots and fallen limbs. For the first time, I felt the kind of fear that presses on your chest, makes it hard to breathe. I stopped and listened. The forest was alive with something that wasn't birds or wind. A presence, quiet but heavy, hovering just beyond my vision. I could feel eyes on me, unseen and patient, watching my every move. Night came quickly in the mountains, faster than I expected, the gray clouds swallowing the remaining light. The wind picked up, whispering through the pines like a chorus of hushed voices. I kept moving, my hands brushing against the trees, my boots slipping on the loose soil. Every sound was amplified. The crack of a branch, the shuffle of leaves, my own ragged breathing. I thought I saw a figure standing on a ridge ahead, but when I blinked, it was gone. My mind played tricks on me, I told myself. And yet that creeping dread in my chest refused to leave. Something was out there, following, patient and unseen. Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes, and I stumbled down a slope, nearly tripping over exposed roots. I screamed again, calling Jenna, my voice raw, my throat burning. Then I saw the faint glow of the ranger station's windows in the distance. Relief surged through me, but it was short-lived. When I reached the station, it was empty. No rangers, no hikers, nothing. Just the faint smell of wood smoke lingering in the air, like someone had been there, but gone in an instant. I sat on the steps, shaking, trying to convince myself that Jenna had simply wandered further down the trail, that she was okay. But I knew better. Something had taken her, or at least something had interfered in a way I couldn't explain. I reported it, of course. I told them what happened, where she went, how the trail had seemed to shift under my feet. The ranger raised an eyebrow, asked the usual questions. Did anyone see you two? How far were you from the overlook? They took notes, polite, professional, but I could see the skepticism in their eyes. Weeks went by. Search parties combed the peak but found nothing. No footprints, no backpack, no sign of Jenna, just the forest, patient and silent, refusing to give up its secrets. Months later, hikers started whispering about a figure on the peak, someone standing at the cliff's edge watching silently. Approaching it made the figure vanish, like it was made of shadow and fog. I couldn't stop thinking about it, about Jenna's absence, about the way the mountain seemed to mock me with its quiet, eternal watchfulness. Sometimes at night I dream of the trail, the bend near the cliffs, and I hear her voice calling to me through the wind. I wake up drenched in sweat, heart pounding, and I know I'll never forget the way the forest held her, and the eyes that never blinked, waiting somewhere above Raven's Peak. I don't go back. I don't want to see what lingers there, but the memory has settled into me like a shadow I can't shake. A warning carved into my bones. Some trails are not meant to be fully walked, some mountains keep their secrets well, and some disappearances aren't accidents. They're the forest's way of reminding you that you never really own your path, no matter how many years you've hiked it, even now. Years later, I can feel her absence, the gap where she should be, and the shadow that waits, patient and silent. At the top of Raven's Peak, it isn't the fall that kills you, it's the waiting. And I know in the deepest part of my chest that waiting is still there. I never believed in hikers' tales, not really. You hear the stories around town, passed along at gas stations or trailheads, the ones about people vanishing into the fog or never returning from a short trek. But I always chalked them up to exaggeration. Experience, I told myself, would keep me safe. That morning I set out alone on the Misty trail, a path I'd taken a few times before. The fog was so thick it made the forest feel smaller, more intimate, but in the kind of way that made the trees feel too close, like they were leaning in to watch. Visibility dropped to mere feet, and each step I took was muffled by damp moss and fallen needles. The air was heavy, scented with wet earth and pine, and the only sound I could hear was my own boots against the softened trail. As I walked, I began to hear something faint, just behind me. Whispers, so low at first that I thought the wind was playing tricks. Then they grew more deliberate, soft but persistent, like someone responding to a question I hadn't asked. My pulse quickened and I turned abruptly, but there was no one there. Just fog, thick and motionless, hanging between the trunks of the trees. I told myself it was my imagination, nerves from hiking alone, the kind of mental strain that builds when the path is empty and the silence is absolute. Still, the whispers followed me, drifting between the trunks, rising and falling in a cadence I couldn't place. The trail began to twist, unnaturally. Paths I remembered clearly from my last hike seemed to bend differently, almost leading me in circles. Every familiar landmark was just slightly off. Trees where there hadn't been any, rocks that weren't in the same place, the incline changing without reason. Panic started to rise in my chest. I tried to retrace my steps, hoping to find the trailhead, or at least some sign of another hiker, but the forest refused to cooperate. Then I saw it, a discarded water bottle on the ground. I bent down and noticed a name etched into the plastic that I didn't recognize. My stomach sank as I realized no record of this person existed at the trailhead or in any local search reports. I clutched the bottle like a lifeline and called out, but my voice was swallowed by the fog. The whispers didn't stop. They circled me, sometimes close, sometimes further away, repeating fragments of my own name as if testing me. Hours passed, or maybe minutes, and I couldn't tell. The sun, if it had been out at all, had long vanished behind the gray ceiling of clouds. My sense of time had collapsed into an unbroken, tense present where every shadow and rustle seemed alive. I stumbled over roots, twisted my ankle on hidden stones, and felt the fog press against me like a living thing. Eventually, I broke through the thicket into a clearing I recognized. There, the ranger cabin stood, or at least I thought it did. The windows were dark and empty, and the door creaked open on a hinge that hadn't been there the last time I'd hiked. The place smelled abandoned, but still lingering with faint wood smoke, like someone had been inside recently. I called for help, knocking on the door, shouting into the fog, but no one answered. No footprints, no signs of life, just the silence, thick and expectant, wrapping me in dread. I remember gripping the doorframe, shivering, wondering if the forest had somehow shifted me here, or if I'd been walking in circles for hours. It wasn't until weeks later that I understood just how real the danger had been. A search team discovered the remains of another hiker, long gone, right in the spot where I had panicked and found that water bottle. Years old, they said. Someone who had been swallowed by the Misty trail, leaving only whispers behind. I survived by some grace I can't explain, but I can still hear those voices, Every foggy morning, the whispers return, soft and persistent, carrying my name through the low-hanging mist. Sometimes I swear I see movement beyond the trees, the suggestion of a figure that vanishes when I focus too hard. I never walk that trail alone again, and I warn others, but people think I exaggerate. The forest keeps its secrets. Even now, when the fog rolls in thick over the ridges, I feel it watching me, circling, patient and quiet, waiting for me to misstep. I know I can't escape it completely. The Misty Trail has left its mark, an ache in my chest, a permanent uncertainty about what is behind the next bend. I remember the fear as vividly as I remember breathing that damp morning air. And sometimes I still wake in the middle of the night, certain that the whispers have followed me home. They don't say much, just my name, repeated softly, like the forest itself is trying to remind me that it is still there, still patient, still waiting. And I can't help but think about the hiker they found, and what it must have felt like to be alone in that fog, with nothing but the whispering, watching shadows, and the cruelly shifting trail, until there was nothing left at all. I carry that weight with me now. Every hike, every step into the mountains, a quiet dread that hums at the edge of my thoughts. The Misty Trail isn't forgiving, and it isn't kind. It doesn't care if you've hiked it before, or if you've prepared for the weather, or if you call for help until your voice cracks. It waits, patient, for the right moment, when you've grown too confident, when you let your attention slip, and then it folds you into its fog, and you become just another echo. I survived, but I know the forest remembers, and the whispers never let go. My cousin and I had planned that trip for months, mapping the Pine Ridge Trail and hoping to chart parts that few hikers had touched. The early morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of wet earth and pine sap, and at first, the forest felt alive in the familiar way it always did. Birds calling, insects buzzing, the occasional rustle of small animals. But as we climbed deeper, a peculiar silence settled over the trail. It wasn't the gentle quiet you get in the forest when everything is at rest. It was unnatural. No birds, no insects, not even the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. Just the crunch of our boots on the soft pine needles, a sound that seemed to echo too clearly in the stillness. I mentioned it to my cousin, thinking maybe it was just early morning, but his furrowed brow told me he felt it too. We pushed on, scanning the woods for any signs of wildlife or other hikers. After an hour, we came across a clearing. At first glance, it looked like an abandoned campsite, old and weathered. But as we got closer, I noticed details that made my skin prickle. A fire pit with scattered ashes that still held faint warmth. A makeshift sleeping area, as if someone had used it recently. And lying in the dirt was a small leather-bound journal, partially buried under needles and twigs. My cousin picked it up and flipped through it, revealing entries that were coherent at first, but trailed off mid-sentence, the handwriting growing erratic. I felt an unease settle over me, a deep pit of dread that tightened in my chest. We didn't notice it at first, not until I turned to speak to my cousin and found him gone. I called his name, my voice cracking in the eerie silence, but there was no answer. I retraced my steps along the clearing, scanning the surrounding trees. But all I could find were footprints leading deeper into the woods, then stopping abruptly at a thicket so dense it seemed impossible to penetrate. I called again, louder this time, heart hammering in my chest, but the forest swallowed my words as if it didn't want to let them go. I ran along the trail, my eyes straining through the dim canopy, but each turn seemed to bring me back to the same spot, the clearing, the journal, the thicket where my cousin had vanished. As night fell, I set up the tent I'd brought for emergencies, but sleep was impossible. Branches snapped just beyond the fabric, shadows flitted across the walls of the tent, and every gust of wind sounded like whispers brushing against my ears. I told myself it was the forest, natural sounds amplified by fear, but even as I convinced myself of that, the feeling of being watched never left. I didn't dare leave the tent until first light, and when I did, the trail looked different, unrecognizable, as if the forest itself had shifted while I slept. Paths I thought I knew led me in circles. Rocks and roots I remembered were gone, replaced by new obstacles that didn't exist the day before. I tried to mark my route, scratch notches into trees, but when I looked back, the marks had faded, leaving no trace that I'd even been there. Hours stretched on, or maybe minutes, I couldn't tell. The trail twisted endlessly, folding back on itself, leading me deeper into a section of forest that was unfamiliar, silent, and claustrophobic. Occasionally, I would spot movement at the edge of my vision, a branch bending as if someone had brushed past it, but when I turned, there was nothing. I began to whisper his name constantly, desperate, pleading, but only my own echo answered. Hunger and thirst became secondary to fear, and I realized the forest had trapped me in a loop of my own making, a maze I couldn't escape. Eventually, I stumbled into a small stream and followed it, hoping it would lead somewhere familiar. The sun was low, barely cutting through the canopy, and shadows pooled like ink across the forest floor. My legs ached, my lungs burned, and still, the trail refused to give up a way forward. Finally, I emerged onto a familiar ridge where the trail split into 3 paths, but none led where they should. Panic was complete. I couldn't remember which way we had come, which way he had gone, or what was real anymore. Every sound, every shadow, every gust of wind seemed amplified, as if the forest itself was alive and intent on keeping me there. Weeks later, authorities found my cousin's belongings at a ranger station at the edge of the Pine Ridge Trail. His pack, water bottle, and journal, the one we'd found in the clearing, were sitting on a desk. Neatly arranged, but there was no sign of him. No tracks beyond the clearing. No footprints leading to civilization. Just silence, stretched tight over the ridge like a shroud. They asked me questions, and I told them everything, but their faces told me they didn't believe it. Maybe I didn't either, not fully. I tried to retrace our route after that, but the forest seemed different every time. Paths had shifted. Trees blocked familiar clearings. Every attempt ended the same way, in confusion, fear, and the oppressive stillness of Pine Ridge. Sometimes at night, I dream of the clearing, of the journal with its unfinished sentences, of the footprints leading into the thicket where the world seemed to vanish. The snapping branches, the whispering shadows, the eyes I felt but never saw. They linger in my memory as if the forest had claimed them for itself. Every time I hike anywhere near the ridge now, I hear movement behind me, light at first, subtle, almost dismissible, until it grows unmistakable, the brush of something following, circling, watching. I never see it directly, never turn in time, but I know it's there. The memory of that day has nested in me, a permanent ache in my chest and a weight in my stomach. I tell myself it was a lapse in judgment, that my cousin wandered off and got lost, that the forest is simply confusing, dangerous, and indifferent. But deep down I know better. Pine Ridge has its own will, patient and relentless, bending paths, erasing traces, keeping secrets. It doesn't move like an animal or act like a person, it waits. I survived, but only barely, and I carry the echo of that day everywhere. The silence, the whispers, the trail folding back on itself, the journal, the unfinished words, they all follow me, and I know that somewhere out there, my cousin's absence lingers, swallowed whole by the forest that doesn't forget, doesn't forgive, and never releases what it claims. I was hiking alone that day, wanting nothing more than to escape the noise of town, the constant hum of people and traffic, and just breathe in the mountains. The trail was narrow and overgrown in places, the pines pressing close on either side, needles damp underfoot from a light morning drizzle. I hadn't seen anyone else for hours. It was quiet in a way that should have been peaceful, but it had a weight to it, like the forest was holding its breath. I followed a small ridge off the main trail, curious, hoping for a better vantage point, when I noticed a cabin tucked between the trees. I hadn't seen it on any maps, and I knew most of the trails in that area. The roof sagged slightly, the wood darkened and weathered, but a thin curl of smoke rose faintly from the chimney. As I approached, the door creaked open on its own. My pulse jumped, and I froze for a moment, debating whether I should retreat. Part of me wanted to turn back. Another part, stubborn and curious, edged forward. I stepped inside. The air smelled of damp wood, mold, and decay, heavy enough to make my eyes water. The floorboards groaned under my boots, each sound echoing unnaturally in the stillness. I called out, my voice hoarse, thinking someone might be inside. Silence answered. I took a step further, past the threshold, noticing the faint warmth of the fire pit outside seeping through the cracks in the cabin wall. Ashes still glowed faintly red, like someone had been there recently, and that thought made my stomach tighten. The interior was small, but every surface seemed to tell a story. Dusty furniture leaned against walls, a rocking chair frozen mid-swing, a table with a few cracked mugs. Then I noticed a wall, one I hadn't paid attention to at first, covered in writing. Names scrawled in various handwritings, dates etched beside some, initials beside others. I walked closer, running my fingers over the uneven carvings. One name made me stop cold. It was the name of a hiker who had disappeared last summer. Someone reported missing near this area. I felt a chill creep up my spine, a sense that I was being watched. The air grew heavier, almost suffocating, and I sensed eyes on me, though the room was empty. I spun around, heart hammering, but the cabin was still, silent, refusing to answer. I tried to convince myself it was the wind, the way the branches pressed against the walls, the smell of damp timber playing tricks on my mind. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was lingering just beyond my vision. My steps quickened as I explored the remaining rooms. Every corner, every shadow seemed alive, shifting when I looked directly at it. I felt an instinctive dread, the kind you can't rationalize away. The cabin had a presence, patient and unblinking, like it had been waiting for someone to come through that door. I turned back toward the entrance, ready to leave, but the door slammed shut behind me with a force that shook the frame. Panic overtook me. I tried the handle. It wouldn't budge. I pounded on the door, shouted, but only my echo answered. My chest tightened as I searched for another way out, windows too high, boards nailed tight. I remember thinking in a quiet, desperate way that the cabin itself didn't want me to leave. The shadows seemed to gather, stretching long across the floor, brushing the edges of my vision like fingers. I could feel their weight pressing down, heavy in the air, tangible and relentless. Eventually, I found an old, loose plank at the back, pried it free, and crawled through into the cold, damp forest. The fog had thickened outside, wrapping the trees in white haze that muted sound and depth. I ran blindly, branches scratching at my jacket, roots threatening to trip me with every step. The cabin receded behind me, dark and still, silent once more. By the time I reached the main trail, my legs were raw, lungs burning, heart racing. I didn't stop until I reached the edge of the forest, the trailhead, where cars were parked and people moved as if nothing had happened in those woods. Even now, I can't forget the wall of names, the way they stared at me, accusing, observing. Sometimes I think about that hiker from last summer, the one whose name I recognized, and I wonder if they felt the same weight, the same presence, the same silent watching. I can't stop imagining who or what adds the names, marks the walls, leaves that evidence behind. And in the quiet moments, when the wind presses against my window and the trees groan, I feel it again, the eyes, the patient weight in the air, waiting somewhere, remembering me. I've thought about going back to find answers, but every instinct tells me not to. The cabin doesn't belong to maps or men. It belongs to the forest, to something older, slower, patient. It waits for anyone who wanders too far, anyone curious, anyone alone. I survived that day, but the memory is a shadow I carry. The names linger, not just in my mind, but on the edges of my vision, in the quiet moments when I hear the wind through the trees. I can't escape them, can't escape that sense of being watched, and I know somehow the cabin remembers me too. Even now, years later, I dream of it. The floorboards groaning, the faint glow of the fire pit, the carved names on the wall. And in those dreams I hear whispers, soft and deliberate, repeating my name. I wake up drenched in sweat, and for a moment I feel the weight of those eyes heavy in the air, just beyond my vision. The forest, the cabin, the names, they're patient, and they don't forget. I survived, but a part of me never left that place. And I know, in the quietest moments, it's still waiting. I had always thought of the old mill trail as peaceful, a quiet shortcut to the river that few people took anymore. The beginning was exactly that. Gentle slopes, sunlight spilling through the canopy in golden beams, the occasional bird call punctuating the soft rustle of leaves underfoot. My friend Tom and I had set out early, backpacks light, cameras slung over our shoulders. We joked about who would get the best shot of the river at the end of the trail, unaware that the day would twist into something none of us could have imagined. About halfway in, the sun dipped unexpectedly, though the hour was still early. Shadows stretched and grew long, moving in ways that made my stomach twist. The forest felt different all at once, heavier, denser, as if it had drawn in a breath and was holding it. I felt eyes on me, though there was no one there. My skin prickled. Tom had gone ahead, scouting a bend in the path for photos, and I called to him, but my voice seemed to vanish into the thickening woods. The crunch of my boots against the soil sounded unnaturally loud, echoing through the trees. I started moving faster, expecting to catch up to him, but the forest resisted me. Every turn, every clearing looked familiar yet slightly off. Then I saw his gear. A backpack, camera, and water bottle were scattered across the trail, lying as if dropped in a hurry. But there was no sign of Tom. I called his name, shouted, my voice cracking, but the silence pressed back at me. Panic gnawed at my chest. I noticed footprints leading toward the abandoned mill I had passed on maps, though it was further along the trail than we had planned. The prints were human-shaped but far too deep and oddly spaced, like someone or something was walking on stilts. They led right to the mill, circling its exterior, then stopped abruptly. The air grew heavy, almost tangible, thick with tension. I could feel it pressing down, like the forest itself was watching and waiting. I stepped closer to the mill, curiosity clashing with terror. The structure was old, half collapsed in places, but the footprints suggested recent activity. My heart pounded, and the sound of my own breath seemed deafening in the stillness. I thought I saw movement inside the shadows of the mill's broken windows, but when I blinked, nothing was there. My instinct screamed at me to leave, but I was rooted, caught between fear and the need to understand what had happened to Tom. Then I heard it, a low scrape of wood against stone, subtle at first, then growing louder. I spun around, eyes wide, but saw only the trees, swaying gently in a breeze I couldn't feel. Every instinct told me to run, and I did, stumbling over roots, cutting myself on branches, my lungs burning as I fled. My heart hammered against my ribs like it wanted to escape on its own. When I finally broke through the last line of trees and reached the edge of the woods, the mill was gone. Where it had stood just moments before, there was only open field, grass waving lazily in the wind, as if the building had never existed. I didn't stop running until I reached the river, the sound of water a relief that did little to calm my racing mind. I sat there for what felt like hours, trying to make sense of what I had just experienced. The footprints, the abandoned gear, the thick charged air, they all felt real, terrifyingly real, yet they were impossible to explain. I tried retracing the trail the next day, hoping that sunlight and familiarity would show me what had happened, but the path seemed to shift, the forest twisting back on itself. Trees were in places they hadn't been before. Rocks and roots rearranged as if the woods themselves were mocking me. Weeks later, I learned that no one had reported seeing Tom, and no trace of him was ever found. The old mill trail had swallowed him, leaving only the echoes of his presence behind. Even now, when the wind blows just right, I can hear whispers that carry his name, faint at first, almost gentle, then sharp and accusatory. I feel the memory of the mill and its footprints in my chest, like a weight that will never lift. I can't explain what I saw, what I felt, or why the building vanished. The forest seems to remember, patient and silent, waiting for anyone who wanders too far. I avoid that trail now, but sometimes necessity or curiosity draws me back. Each time the trees feel closer, the shadows longer, the air heavier. The wind seems to hum with voices, soft murmurs that twist my name into the mix. I know the forest doesn't forget. I know that the place where the mill once stood is still there in some form, hiding in the corner of my mind, waiting for me, or the next person foolish enough to wander that way. I survived, but the weight of the forest, the strange prints, the whispers in Tom's absence, it follows me. It sits on my shoulders and presses in my ears until I can't sleep. Some nights I swear I see movement in the dark, fleeting shapes that vanish the moment I try to focus. The old mill trail doesn't forgive, it doesn't explain, and it doesn't let go. I've tried telling people about what happened, but they shake their heads or laugh nervously, thinking I'm exaggerating. But I know the truth. The forest remembers, it watches, and it waits. Tom may be gone, but his absence is alive in that place, and the memory of it lingers in me. The trail whispers still, and every time the wind blows through the trees, I hear it again, soft, patient, insistent, Tom, 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 and I know deep down that the old mill trail will never stop calling.